Make sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button right now to see much more content just like this.
The first time Denzel Brooks saw the old man, he was standing waist-deep in floodwater beside a horse trailer that was starting to tip. Denzel hit the brakes so hard, the 6 heifers behind his Ford slammed against the trailer gates. Damn it! He had 43 minutes to reach the auction yard. If he missed check-in, Grant Daly would lose nearly $18,000. And Denzel already knew exactly who Grant would blame. Lightning ripped across the Montana sky. For half a second, Denzel saw everything clearly. The stranded pickup. The trailer sunk sideways into the ditch. 2 terrified horses kicking against the steel walls, and the old man trying to hold the rear doors shut while brown water climbed past his knees. Then darkness swallowed the road again. Denzel grabbed his phone. No signal. He looked at the dashboard clock. 5:17. Grant's warning from that morning came back to him. Those cattle missed that auction, Brooks. Don't bother coming back. Denzel looked at the road ahead. The auction yard was 38 miles east. He could still make it. Maybe. Behind him, the cattle shifted impatiently. Then a violent metallic crash exploded from the ditch. Denzel turned. The horse trailer dropped another 6 inches. The old man fell. One of the horses screamed. Denzel stopped thinking about the auction. He threw the truck into park and ran into the storm. "Sir." The old man tried to stand, slipped again, and caught himself against the trailer. "There are 2 horses inside." "I know. The mare's panicking." Another crash shook the trailer. Denzel reached the water and immediately felt the current pulling against his boots. This wasn't just runoff anymore. The drainage ditch was becoming a river. "How long has the truck been stuck?" 20 minutes. "You call anyone?" "No service." Denzel looked under the trailer. Mud had swallowed most of the right side tires. If the water rose much more, the trailer would roll. He glanced at his watch. 5:20. 3 minutes gone. Grant was going to kill him. But if Denzel drove away now, those horses might be dead before he reached the county line. The old man saw him looking toward the road. "You've got livestock." "Yeah." "You're headed somewhere important." "Yeah." "Then go." Denzel looked at him. "What?" "I said go. This isn't your problem." A horse kicked the trailer wall so hard the metal bowed outward. Denzel stared at the old man for 1 second. Then he pulled off his jacket. "It became my problem when I stopped." He climbed into the trailer. The chestnut mare nearly crushed him against the wall. Her eyes were wide, nostrils white with foam. "Easy, easy." Thunder cracked directly overhead. She reared. Denzel flattened himself against the partition. Outside, the old man shouted, "Get out!" Denzel ignored him. His grandfather had taught him something about frightened horses long before he taught him anything about cattle. Never fight fear with more fear. Denzel lowered his voice. "You don't know me, girl. That's all right." The mare trembled. "You don't have to trust me." Another surge of water struck the trailer. Denzel reached slowly for the lead rope. "You just have to come with me." The mare jerked backward. Then the trailer shifted. "Hard," the old man yelled. Denzel felt the floor tilt beneath his boots. They had seconds. He clipped the rope. "Now." The mare exploded toward the open door. Denzel went with her. They hit the water together. He nearly lost his footing, recovered, and dragged her toward higher ground. The old man grabbed the lead. Denzel pointed toward the fence. "Take her up there." What about the other one? I'm getting him. Leave him. Denzel turned back toward the trailer. What? It's too dangerous. Denzel looked at the black gelding trapped inside. Then at the old man. You telling me to leave your horse? The man's face broke. No. That's what I thought. Denzel went back. By the time the second horse was out, Denzel's hands were bleeding, his shirt was plastered to his body, and the dashboard clock read 5:34. He stared at it through the rain. 26 minutes until check-in. Impossible. The old man came beside him. You missed something because of me. Denzel didn't answer. His phone suddenly found one bar of signal. It rang immediately. Grant Daly. Denzel stared at the name. The old man looked at him. You should answer. Denzel did. Grant didn't say hello. Where the hell are my cattle? Denzel looked at the stranded trailer. County Road 16. Why? There was an accident? With my truck? No. Silence. Then Grant's voice became dangerously calm. You stopped. There was an old man in a flooded ditch with 2 horses. And? Denzel frowned. And what? And why is that my problem? Denzel looked at the old man. It isn't. Correct. So why did you make it yours? The trailer was going over. I don't care about the trailer. Denzel's jaw tightened. Grant. The auction called me. Denzel closed his eyes. They gave away our slot. I figured. You figured. Grant's voice exploded through the phone. That lot was worth $18,000 more today than it'll be worth next week. We don't know that. I know you ignored a direct order. I wasn't going to watch 2 horses drown. That was your choice. Yes. And now you get to live with it. Denzel's stomach tightened. What does that mean? It means bring my cattle back. Fine. And clean out your locker. Denzel went still. The old man watched him. Grant, you're done. 7 years. Denzel had given 7 years to that ranch. Calving nights, frozen pipes, broken fences, weekends, Christmas mornings. 7 years erased in 2 words. You're firing me? You fired yourself when you decided some stranger mattered more than, this ranch. The old man looked away. Denzel's voice lowered. He could have died. Then he should have checked the weather. Denzel clenched his jaw. There was no point arguing. Then Grant asked something strange. Who is he? Denzel frowned. What? The man you stopped for. What's his name? Denzel looked toward the old cowboy. Thomas Callahan. Silence. Not anger, not frustration. Something else. Denzel straightened. Grant? You said Callahan? Yes. Another pause. Denzel had worked for Grant long enough to recognize fear when he heard it. Bring the cattle back, Grant said. The call ended. Denzel slowly lowered the phone. The old man was watching him. You know Grant Daly? Denzel asked. Thomas didn't answer. That answer was enough. Denzel stepped closer. How? Thomas looked at Denzel's face. Then his eyes dropped to Denzel's right hand. A pale birthmark curved from his wrist toward his thumb. Thomas froze. Denzel noticed. What? Thomas reached toward the mark but stopped before touching him. Who was your grandfather? Denzel stared at him. What does that have to do with Grant? Your grandfather. The urgency in Thomas's voice changed everything. Who was he? Samuel Brooks. The color drained from Thomas Callahan's face. For several seconds, even the storm seemed quieter. Then the old man whispered, "Sam Brooks. You knew him?" Thomas looked toward the mountains. "Yes." "How?" Thomas turned back to Denzel. And what he said next made Denzel forget the auction, the lost job, and the $80 still sitting in his wallet. "Because your grandfather saved my family from losing everything." Denzel stared. Thomas swallowed. "And we repaid him by taking the one thing he wanted most." The wind pushed rain across the road between them. Denzel waited for an explanation. Thomas glanced toward the horses. "We need to get them somewhere safe first." "You just told me your family took something from my grandfather." "I know." "What?" Thomas looked toward the sunken trailer. "Not here." "Then where?" "Tomorrow." Denzel laughed without humor. "You don't even know where I live." "Daly Ranch." "For about another hour." Thomas's expression tightened. "I'll find you." "That sounds like something your family says a lot." Thomas absorbed the insult. "I deserve that." "You don't know what you deserve yet." Denzel walked back to his truck. Thomas followed. "I owe you for the tow." "No." "For the fuel." "No." "For today." Denzel stopped. Thomas held out his hand. Denzel looked at it, but didn't take it. Thomas lowered it slowly. "You helped me before you knew anything about me. I helped the horses. You helped me too. Don't turn that into something bigger than it was." Thomas nodded. "Maybe that's exactly what your grandfather would have said." That made Denzel look at him again. "Tomorrow," Thomas said. "If you don't come, I'll find you." "I believe you." Denzel climbed into the truck. As he pulled back onto the road, he looked in the mirror. Thomas Callahan stood beside two wet horses under a clearing Montana sky. For the first time in 7 years, Denzel was driving toward Daly Ranch without knowing whether he belonged there anymore. By the time he reached the ranch, the storm had moved east. Late sunlight broke through clouds and turned the wet pastures gold. Grant was waiting beside the machine shed. Denzel didn't need to ask if the decision had changed. Grant had placed Denzel's personal saddle, 2 jackets, a thermos, and the small metal toolbox from his locker on the gravel. Denzel parked. Grant stared at the muddy truck. "You could have called Earl Simmons to help." "I did." "You could have dropped the cattle first." "The trailer would have rolled." "You don't know that." "I watched it move." Grant crossed his arms. "The auction sold that slot." "I heard you the first time." "You've cost me money before." Denzel frowned. "No, I haven't. Every employee costs money." "That's not what you said." Grant's jaw tightened. "You want to argue semantics?" "I want you to say what this is really about." Grant looked toward the barns. "This is about you ignoring an order." "No." Denzel stepped closer. "This is about Thomas Callahan." Grant's eyes returned to him. "You don't know what you're talking about? Then explain why she went quiet when you heard his name." "I know people." "You know him?" "I know of him." "Same way you knew of my grandfather?" Grant's face moved, tiny. But Denzel caught it. That was all he needed. "You knew Samuel Brooks." "I knew the name." "How?" "Denzel, get your things and go home. I am asking you a question, and I am no longer paying you to ask me questions." Denzel stared at him. There had been a time when that tone would have worked, when losing the job would have frightened him enough to swallow whatever he wanted to say. But the job was already gone, Grant had thrown away his leverage. You wanted me out before today. That's ridiculous. You stopped letting me attend cattle buying meetings last year because you're a ranch hand. I was assistant foreman when it suited you. Grant said nothing. You stopped sending me to county grazing meetings. Business decision. You started asking where I went on my days off. Grant stepped forward. You're reaching. And you just happened to fire me 10 seconds after hearing Callahan's name. I fired you before I knew his name. Denzel nodded. You're right. Grant relaxed slightly. Then Denzel added, but you got scared afterward. Grant's face went cold. You always had too much pride. Denzel smiled. That what this is? I gave you a steady job when half the outfits around here wouldn't. There it was. The debt Grant had always believed Denzel owed. Denzel looked toward the corrals he had repaired more times than he could count. The calving shed he had helped rebuild. The north fence he had replaced during a snowstorm. 7 years ago, you gave me a job. Yes, and for 7 years I gave you work. Grant's nostrils flared. We're even. Denzel picked up his saddle. Grant spoke behind him. Stay away from Thomas Callahan. Denzel stopped. Why? Because he doesn't care about you. I didn't ask if he cared. He's an old rich man with a guilty conscience. People like him reach for people like you when they need forgiveness. Denzel slowly turned. People like me. Grant sighed. Don't do that. Do what? Make it something it isn't. What is it? You know damn well I'm talking about employees. Hired men. People without the resources to fight someone like Callahan. Denzel held his gaze. Then why are you the one afraid? Grant looked away first. Denzel loaded his saddle. As he climbed into the truck, Grant said, You get mixed up in old family business. Don't come asking me for help when it goes bad. Denzel started the engine. I worked here 7 years. Grant waited. If I thought you were the kind of man I could ask for help, I probably wouldn't be leaving. He drove away. His house sat 8 miles outside Three Forks, a small rental with peeling white paint, a sagging porch, and enough land for one old sorrel gelding named Duke. Duke lifted his head when Denzel pulled in. Denzel fed him before going inside. His grandfather had taught him that too. Animals didn't care whether you'd had a bad day. They still needed water, still needed feed, still needed someone dependable. Inside, Denzel removed his wet shirt and stared at the bruise forming over his ribs where the mare had shoved him against the trailer wall. His hands were scraped. His right wrist throbbed. He opened the cabinet. Ibuprofen, coffee, no whiskey. He had stopped keeping liquor after leaving the army because he had discovered there were nights when one drink became 4 before he noticed. Denzel made coffee instead. On the kitchen table sat an envelope. Brooks Land. He pulled out the money. $3,840. 4 years of savings. The property he wanted was only 12 acres now, carved from a larger tract that had once belonged to his grandfather. The owner wanted $25,000 down. Denzel had been working extra weekends, breaking horses, repairing fences, hauling hay. Every spare dollar went into the envelope. He had planned to reach $10,000 by the end of next year. Now the plan looked ridiculous. No job. Rent due. Truck needed. Tires. Duke was getting older. Denzel counted the cash again, as if the amount might change. Then he noticed the framed photograph beside the envelope. Samuel Brooks. His grandfather stood next to a black horse, hat pushed back, one hand on the saddle horn. The same pale birthmark curved across Samuel's hand. Denzel picked up the photograph. "What did Callahan take from you?" The room gave no answer. Samuel had died when Denzel was 17. His father, Raymond, had died even earlier in a logging accident. His mother moved to Spokane when Denzel joined the Army and later remarried. Samuel had been the man who taught Denzel what family memory meant. He had taught him to ride, to mend wire, to judge weather by the smell of the wind, to never borrow money for something that couldn't feed you or house you, and to never confuse silence with weakness. But Samuel had never talked about the Callahans. Not directly. There were fragments. His grandmother saying, "Don't drive west past that ranch if Sam's with you." An argument once when Samuel heard the name daily on the radio. A sentence Denzel had almost forgotten. A handshake is only as good as the man who can afford to break it. At 4:30 the next morning, Denzel woke automatically. For a few seconds, his body believed he still had somewhere to be. Then he remembered. He lay in darkness listening to Duke moving in the small paddock. At 6:12, he was drinking coffee when a black Chevrolet Silverado turned into the driveway. Thomas Callahan stepped out. No muddy jacket, no drenched hat, clean jeans, wool coat, polished boots. The truck was almost new. Denzel watched from the window. Yesterday, Thomas had looked like any older rancher who had made one bad decision in terrible weather. Today, he looked like someone accustomed to being expected. Denzel opened the door. "You found me." "I said I would." Thomas held an envelope. "What's that?" $80. Denzel frowned. "You owe me $80? For fuel. Earl wouldn't take money for the tractor." Denzel had forgotten Thomas borrowed cash at the gas station after the rescue. "Keep it." "No." "You drove out here over $80. Thomas looked toward Samuel's photograph through the doorway. "No." Denzel stepped aside. Thomas entered slowly. He stopped the moment he saw the photograph. For a long time, he said nothing. "That was taken near Bridger Creek." Denzel watched him. "You recognize the horse?" "Midnight." "You know its name?" "Yes." Denzel pointed toward the chair. "Sit." Thomas did. Denzel remained standing. "No weather today?" "No." "No horses drowning?" "No." "Talk." Thomas placed the envelope on the table. "Your grandfather began working for Callahan Ranch in 1969. Denzel's expression changed. "He worked for your family?" 28 years. "Grandpa never said that." "I know." "How would you know what he said?" "Because after he left, he made it clear he wanted nothing to do with us." Denzel sat. Thomas looked at the photograph. "My father, Walter Callahan, hired Sam during hay season. Sam was 23. He planned to stay 6 weeks. What changed? He was good. That never surprised anybody." Thomas almost smiled. "No, it didn't." "What did your family take?" Thomas's expression became serious. In 1984, Callahan Ranch was close to foreclosure. Denzel waited. "My father had expanded too fast, borrowed against cattle and land. Interest rates hurt us. A bad winter hurt us worse. We were behind with the bank." "What does that have to do with Sam?" "Your grandfather had built a small Angus herd of his own, on leased ground. Good genetics, better cattle than ours." Denzel stared. "I never knew he owned cattle." "He did." "How many?" "Enough." "Enough for what?" "To save us." Thomas folded his hands. A buyer from Idaho offered a private contract. We could fulfill the number, but not the quality. Sam could. Yes. He sold his cattle to you? Not exactly. Thomas looked ashamed. He combined his herd with ours under the Callahan name so the contract could go through. And he loaned my father $27,000. Denzel laughed once, not because it was funny. Samuel Brooks loaned Callahan Ranch $27,000 in 1984. Yes. Where did he get that? Years of saving. Denzel felt something tighten in his chest. His grandfather had spent his life telling him to save. What did Walter promise? Thomas looked toward the window. West Meadow. What's that? 200 acres on the southwest side of Callahan Ranch. 200? 206, according to the old survey. Denzel went still. What was the deal? The money, the cattle, and several years of additional work in exchange for the land once the bank released it as collateral. Written? Yes. Denzel leaned forward. Then why didn't Samuel get it? Thomas took too long to answer. Because we didn't give it to him. Denzel stared. Thomas continued. The cattle contract worked. Within 4 years, the ranch stabilized. By 1989, we were profitable. And Samuel? Waited. How long? Thomas looked directly at him. Until 1997. Denzel stood. 13 years. Yes. You made him wait 13 years after the ranch recovered? My father kept delaying. Your father? Yes. What about you? Thomas's silence changed the room. Denzel understood. You were running the ranch by then. Most of it. So you could have transferred it. Yes. And you didn't. No. Denzel walked to the sink. He put both hands on the counter. Why? By the early 90s, the land had become more valuable. Denzel laughed bitterly. There it is. I'm not proud of it. I don't care what you're proud of. Thomas nodded. Denzel turned. My grandfather died renting pasture. I know. He sold his 40 acres when Grandma got cancer. I know. He thought he failed. Thomas looked down. I know. Denzel stepped toward him. Stop saying that. Thomas looked up. You keep saying you know, like knowing is the same as doing something. It isn't. No. Denzel pointed at Samuel's photograph. He spent his whole life working. Yes. And your family took the one thing that would have let him stop working for other men. Thomas closed his eyes. Yes. The answer was too simple. Too late. Denzel sat again. Proof. Thomas reached into his coat. He placed a photocopied letter on the table. Walter Callahan's handwriting. January 11th, 1985. Samuel, this confirms our understanding regarding your financial contribution and cattle used to fulfill the November 1984 contract. Upon repayment and stabilization of Callahan Ranch debt, approximately 200 acres known as West Meadow shall be transferred to you or your heirs. Denzel read that line twice. Or your heirs. He looked at Thomas. Where's the original? My safe. Why do you have it? Sam returned it to my father in 1997. Why? He was angry. I can imagine. He told my father a promise that required begging wasn't a promise worth keeping. Denzel recognized his grandfather in the words. Thomas slid a survey across the table. Denzel unfolded it. West Meadow, 206 acres, a creek, low ridge, cottonwoods. Then Denzel noticed small markings at the southern edge. Rectangles, names, Brooks, Reed, Talley, Jenkins. What is this? Thomas looked at the map. A cemetery, Denzel's eyes lifted. What cemetery? New Hope? Never heard of it. It hasn't been used in decades. Who's buried there? Black ranch workers, homesteaders, families who lived around the valley from the 1880s through the 1940s. Denzel looked back at the names. My family? Yes. How many? We don't know. You own a cemetery and don't know who's buried there? Thomas absorbed that too. My father called it the Workers' Cemetery. Denzel looked at him. Workers? Yes. Not people. Thomas lowered his eyes. No. Denzel studied the survey. Then he noticed a newer line drawn across the lower corner. What's this? Thomas didn't answer quickly enough. Denzel looked up. What? The land is under contract. The room went silent. To who? Mountain West Infrastructure. For? A freight access road connected to a proposed aggregate operation. Denzel looked at the line. It crossed the cemetery. You're selling it? My daughter negotiated the agreement. You own the ranch. Not all of it. Then stop the sale. It isn't that simple. Everybody keeps saying that right before explaining something simple. Thomas breathed out. The Callahan estate has debt. Not my problem? No. Then why are you here? Because closing is in 28 days. Denzel stared. So you waited almost 40 years to tell my family until somebody put a deadline on your conscience. Thomas did not defend himself. Yes. That answer stopped Denzel for a moment. Not because it excused anything, because it didn't. Thomas was not trying to sound noble. Denzel sat back. Why now? Thomas looked toward the photograph again. I have pancreatic cancer. Denzel said nothing. They found it late. How late? Maybe 8 months, maybe a year. The anger remained, but it shifted. Thomas continued. I spent most of my life believing there would always be another season to correct what I was ashamed of. He looked at Denzel. There isn't. So I'm your last confession? No. What am I? Sam's heir. Denzel looked at the letter. Thomas added, and there is one more reason you need to know. Grant Daly. Thomas nodded. Denzel felt his jaw tighten. What does he have to do with West Meadow? He owns part of it. What? Through Daly Land Management. Grant owns part of Callahan Ranch? 40% of the West Meadow interests. Denzel stared. How? Distant family shares. My brother's children, my sister's estate. Grant bought them gradually. And you let him? We didn't know how much he had accumulated until 2 years ago. Denzel thought of Grant's reaction. His warning. Stay away from Thomas Callahan. How much does Grant make if the road goes through? Several million. Denzel laughed without humor. So yesterday wasn't about $18,000? Thomas looked at him. I don't think it was. Denzel stood. Show me the land. West Meadow didn't look like $11 million. It looked like Montana. That was the first thought Denzel had when Thomas opened the old gate. Rolling grass, a creek lined with cottonwoods, sagebrush on the ridge, mountains in the distance still holding snow. No luxury houses, no signs, no road, just ground. Denzel walked slowly. Thomas stayed several steps behind. Where's the cemetery? Southrise. They crossed the creek. The stones appeared gradually. At first, Denzel thought they were rocks. Then he saw the pattern. Rows, some upright, some fallen, most no more than field stones. He moved among them. A faint carving caught his eye. M. Brooks, 1892-1937. Denzel crouched. He wiped dirt from the stone. Farther down, he found another. Elias Brooks. His grandmother used to mention Great-Uncle Elias. A horseman, never married. Could ride anything with hair. Denzel had never known where he was buried. He touched the stone. Thomas remained back. Good. Denzel didn't want him close. A truck engine sounded beyond the gate. Thomas turned. His expression tightened. A white Range Rover stopped. A woman stepped out. Mid-40s, blonde hair tied back, dark jacket, expensive boots. She walked across the grass. Dad. Thomas sighed. Evelyn. Her eyes moved to Denzel. You must be Denzel Brooks. He stood. You must know why I'm here. I do. Then we can skip introductions. Thomas said, Evelyn. No, Dad. You told him without speaking to me. It was never your secret to keep. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Denzel looked between them. You know about Samuel? Yes. How long? Most of my adult life. And you're selling the land? I'm trying to save a ranch. Denzel looked toward the graves. By digging these people up? Her face changed. We are not digging anyone up. What do you call relocating remains? The proposed route has not been finalized. Denzel pointed at Thomas's survey. It crosses the cemetery. According to an old map. So the old map matters when it gives your family land, but not when it shows where black families are buried. Thomas closed his eyes. Evelyn's face hardened. That isn't fair. Good. She stared. Fair hasn't been working out too well for the Brooks family. Evelyn stepped closer. Callahan Ranch employs 43 people. Denzel waited. We have equipment debt, water improvement loans, feed costs, insurance, property taxes. My father's treatment is expensive. 2 bad winters and 1 drought have put us in a position my grandfather would recognize. So sell something else. We have. Then don't sell this. You think because my family wronged yours, 43 other families should lose their jobs? No. Then what? I think your emergency doesn't erase my grandfather's. Evelyn looked toward the cemetery. My grandfather made a promise he didn't keep. And your father didn't either. Thomas flinched. Evelyn looked at him, then back at Denzel. If I paid you today what 200 acres were worth in 1997, would that settle it? No. If I paid you double? No. Why? Because you aren't asking what it's worth. What am I asking? How much it costs to make me go away? Evelyn's expression changed. Denzel pointed toward the grave at his feet. He doesn't get to go away. A flicker passed through Evelyn's eyes. Guilt, maybe memory. Before Denzel could ask, Thomas said, Tell him. Evelyn turned. Dad, tell him. Tell me what? She looked at Thomas angrily. You came here to confess and still couldn't tell the entire truth. Denzel stared at him. What else? Thomas lowered his head. Evelyn answered. Callahan Ranch doesn't own all of West Meadow. He told me Grant owns 40%. Not exactly. Denzel waited. Grant owns 40% of the title interests we can trace. What does that mean? There are additional disputed shares, old probate claims, mineral rights, easements. And? Evelyn hesitated. Grant can force a partition sale. Thomas closed his eyes. Denzel looked at him. You knew? Yes. What's a partition sale? Evelyn answered. If co-owners can't agree, Grant can ask a court to order the property sold. To who? Highest bidder. Denzel understood. So even if you stop Mountain West, Grant can still force West Meadow onto the market. Yes. And the Callahans can't afford to buy him out. No. Denzel laughed softly. That's why you came now? Thomas shook his head. Not only, but partly, yes. Denzel looked across the meadow. Samuel had waited 13 years for men who kept finding reasons. Now Denzel had 28 days. He turned to Thomas. I need every document. You'll have them. Not copies you choose. Thomas understood. Everything. And I pick my own lawyer. Yes. Evelyn spoke. Before you turn this into a war. Denzel looked at her. It was a war before I knew it existed. 3 hours later, Denzel was sitting in the office of Helen Mercer, an attorney in Bozeman who handled property disputes and agricultural cases. Helen was in her 50s, wore no-nonsense glasses, and listened without interrupting. When Denzel finished, she looked at the letter, then the survey, then Thomas. You waited how long? Thomas answered, Too long. That's not a legal measurement. Denzel almost smiled. Helen looked at him. You understand, this letter does not automatically make you owner of 200 acres. I figured nothing in this story would be automatic. Good. Because 40-year-old land promises are complicated. Can it be enforced? Possibly. Denzel leaned forward. That means? It means I'm not lying to you. Thomas looked at the desk. Helen continued. We need to examine the original. Probate records, Callahan corporate history, tax payments, whether Samuel was repaid financially, whether the agreement was ever modified, whether the statute of limitations applies, whether actions afterward could support equitable claims. Denzel rubbed his jaw. English. Helen nodded. The letter matters. It might matter a lot. It might not be enough. What about the cemetery? Helen looked at that survey longer. That may give us a faster way to stop construction. How? Historic burial sites involve different rules. If graves extend into the proposed route, the project may need additional review. May? Yes. Denzel sighed. Lawyers love that word. We love words that keep us from promising what judges control. Thomas said, I'll pay your fees. Denzel answered before Helen could. No. Thomas looked at him. You don't have a job. Still no. Denzel, if you pay my lawyer, then every time she tells me something I don't want to hear, I'll wonder who she really works for. Helen nodded. He's right. Thomas leaned back. Denzel asked, How much? Helen told him. He almost laughed. That evening, he took $300 from the Brooks land envelope for the retainer. It hurt more than losing the 80 in the storm. The next morning, Denzel began searching for work. There were ranch jobs available. Always were if a man didn't mind moving. But leaving meant leaving the dispute, leaving Duke, leaving the only ground he had ever wanted. At the second ranch he visited, the foreman looked at his resume. 7 years at Daly. Yes. Why'd you leave? Got fired. The foreman looked up. 4? Stopped during a storm to help somebody with horses. You missed a delivery. Yes. The man leaned back. Grant called yesterday. Denzel's stomach tightened. What did he say? That you don't follow instructions. Denzel nodded slowly. You believe him? I don't know you. That's fair. The foreman pushed the resume back. I can't use trouble right now. The third rejection. Denzel understood. Grant wasn't merely done employing him. Grant was making sure other ranches knew it. That afternoon, Denzel drove to his Aunt Lillian's assisted living apartment. Lillian Brooks was 91 and had no interest in acting old. She opened the door before he knocked. "You're late." "We didn't set a time." "You're still late." Denzel kissed her cheek. Then Thomas stepped from behind him. Lillian stared. Thomas smiled awkwardly. "Hello, Lillian." She looked him up and down. "You got old." "So did you." "I did it better." Denzel looked away so she wouldn't see him smile. Lillian pointed. "You sit over there." Thomas sat where instructed. Denzel placed the old survey on the table. "Aunt Lillian, what do you know about New Hope Cemetery?" Her expression changed immediately. "Why?" "Somebody wants to build a road across it." "No." One word, no hesitation. Thomas lowered his eyes. Denzel nodded. "We're trying to stop it." Lillian pointed at Thomas. "He's selling it." "My daughter negotiated the sale." "Same blood." Thomas accepted that. Denzel sat. "Did Grandpa ever talk about West Meadow?" Lillian looked at him for a long time. "Why are you asking now?" "Because Thomas says Walter Callahan promised it to him." Lillian looked at Thomas. Thomas finally grew a conscience. Thomas said quietly, "Late." Late conscience still got to pay full price. Denzel leaned forward. "Aunt Lillian." She looked at him. "Did Samuel keep records?" Lillian smiled. That smile changed everything. "Your granddaddy kept records of people owing him 50 cents. Denzel felt his pulse increase. "Where?" Lillian pointed toward a cedar chest. "Bottom." Denzel opened it. Quilts, albums, church, programs, a Bible. Under everything sat a metal box. Denzel lifted it onto the table. Thomas stood. "That box used to be in Sam's tack room." Lillian glared. "Sit." Thomas sat. Denzel opened it. Notebooks, letters, receipts, old photographs, a rolled survey, a cassette tape. He opened the first notebook. Samuel's handwriting, cattle numbers, work hours, expenses, then dates. March 3rd, 1985. Walter says West Meadow transferred after bank releases, North Collateral. Thomas present. Denzel looked up. Thomas stared at the page. "He wrote that?" "You tell me." "Yes." Denzel kept reading. 1987. Walter asks, 1 more year. 1989. Debt stabilized. No transfer. Thomas says lawyer needs new survey. 1991. Thomas says family estate complications. Denzel's jaw tightened. Thomas looked miserable. 1994. Sam wrote, "A man can delay a promise until he convinces himself he never made it." Denzel closed the book. "You knew?" Thomas nodded. "For years." "And every time he asked, you gave him another reason?" "Yes." Lillian said, "That boy loved excuses." Thomas looked at her. "I was 40 years old." "Then you were a grown man who loved excuses." Denzel opened another notebook. There were cemetery entries. Cleared south fence, repaired marker for Annie Reed. Elias Talley says his mother buried near Cottonwood. Callahan calves entered cemetery again. Denzel looked at Thomas. "You grazed cattle over graves?" "Not intentionally." Lillian laughed, bitterly. "Neglect feels intentional to the people cleaning up after it." Denzel pulled out the cassette. "What's this?" Lillian's face softened. "Play it." She had an old tape player on the shelf. Denzel inserted the cassette. Static. Then Samuel Brooks' voice filled the room. Denzel froze. "If anybody hears this, I suppose I'm either dead or too tired to fight." Denzel closed his eyes. He hadn't heard that voice in 17 years. "I don't want my family carrying hate." Hate is expensive. Takes too much food off your table and too much sleep out your bed. Lillian stared straight ahead. Thomas lowered his head. But I want the truth remembered. Walter Callahan promised me West Meadow. Thomas heard it. Philip Daly told me to trust him, then went behind my back and worked for Walter. Denzel opened his eyes. Philip Daly? Thomas said nothing. Grant's father. The tape continued. They thought because nothing was filed, nothing happened. A pause. But something did happen. Denzel's throat tightened. I gave them cattle. I gave them money. I gave them 28 years of my hands. I'm not ashamed of the work. I'm ashamed I kept believing a handshake mattered to men whose papers mattered more. Thomas covered his face. There are people buried on that hill who never owned the ground they worked. I thought maybe I could own enough of it to keep their names where they belong. Denzel stared at the table. Then Samuel said his name. If Denzel ever hears this, tell that boy land isn't valuable because somebody says it's worth money. Land matters because somebody remembers you on it. Denzel stopped breathing. For a moment he was 17 again. Hospital room. Samuel too weak to speak clearly. A hand gripping his. Something his grandfather had tried to say but couldn't. The tape hissed. Then Samuel's voice returned. And Thomas, if you hear this, you know what you did. Thomas whispered, turn it off. Denzel didn't. You know what you did. Don't ask my family to make you feel better. Do what you should have done when doing it was hard. The tape ended. Silence. Lillian looked at Thomas. Dead man finally got his meeting. Thomas stood. I need air. He walked outside. Denzel stayed. His eyes burned, but he refused to wipe them. Lillian touched his hand. Your granddaddy loved you. Why didn't he tell me? You were a boy. I was 17. To him, you were a boy. He died thinking nobody knew. No. Lillian shook her head. He died knowing I knew. Denzel looked at her. Why didn't you tell me? Because Sam told me not to hand you his anger before you were old enough to decide what belonged to you. Denzel looked at the notebook. And now? Now somebody is coming for the graves. She tapped the table. Now it belongs to you. Outside, Thomas stood beside his truck. Denzel approached. Thomas looked like he had aged another 10 years. I'm sorry. Denzel stopped. No. Thomas stared. You don't get to make me answer that yet. I wasn't asking you to forgive me. Good. I was telling you. Denzel looked at him. Grandpa said doing it when it was hard mattered. Thomas nodded. So, what are you going to do? Testify. That costs you nothing. It may cost me, my daughter. Still not enough. Thomas looked toward the mountains. I'll oppose the sale. Better. I'll sign an affidavit admitting the agreement. Better. I'll turn over every Callahan record. Better. Thomas looked at him. What do you want? Denzel stepped closer. I want you to stop asking me what will make this easier for you. Thomas held his gaze, then nodded. You're right. Denzel almost laughed. Grandpa said you loved excuses. I think you love that sentence now. Thomas actually smiled. Maybe. Denzel turned toward his truck. Thomas called after him. There is something else. Denzel stopped. Of course there is. Thomas hesitated. Philip Daly didn't merely advise Sam. Denzel looked back. He represented both sides. Denzel went still. What? In 1997, Sam hired Philip to help enforce the agreement. Grant's father was Samuel's lawyer. For a short time. And Philip was already doing legal work for Callahan Ranch. Denzel stared. Did Grandpa know? Not at first. What happened when he found out? He walked out of a meeting. That's when he quit? Yes. Denzel felt cold. And after that? Thomas looked away. 2 months later, Philip drafted a lease for West Meadow. For who? Thomas met Denzel's eyes. Daly Ranch. Denzel stood completely still. The story was no longer Callahan versus Brooks. The Daly family had been inside it for decades. Denzel drove straight to Helen's office. She listened to the tape, read Samuel's notebooks, then asked for silence while she examined the 1997 entries. Finally, she looked up. If this is accurate, Philip Daly had a serious conflict. Can that help us? Possibly. That word again. Helen ignored him. If he used confidential information from Samuel to benefit Callahan or Daly interests, that matters. Can Grant lose his land? Slow down. I'm tired of slow. Then you're going to hate litigation. She pulled out another file. I found something else. Denzel leaned forward. Grant formed Daly Land Management 3 years ago. I know. He began acquiring fractional interests before Mountain West publicly announced the aggregate project. Denzel frowned. He knew. Maybe. You don't buy useless little shares in one field unless you know something. Helen nodded. That is a reasonable inference. Insider information? Not in the securities law sense, but if he had confidential development information, there may be questions. Thomas sat across the room. Helen continued. More important, one of his acquisitions depends on a 1976 deed I haven't been able to reconcile. What's wrong with it? Survey description. Denzel looked at Thomas. Thomas looked confused. Helen said, I'm bringing in a surveyor. Claire Mendoza arrived the next afternoon. She spread 3 maps across Helen's conference table. Claire was 36, wore her dark hair in a low ponytail, and carried pencils like a carpenter carried nails. This, she said, tapping the first map, is the current Mountain West alignment. A red line crossed West Meadow. This is the 1953 county survey. Another line. And this is a 1912 General Land Office map. Denzel leaned closer. A notation appeared near the creek. Burial ground. Claire traced the modern cemetery boundary. Notice the difference. The new one is farther north. Denzel said, correct. How far? Depending on which point you use, between 70 and 130 feet. Denzel looked at the road route. That puts graves under the road. Potentially, Thomas said. Why did the boundary move? Claire hesitated. Could be measurement error. Denzel waited. Or somebody may have used a later survey to redefine it. Helen asked, who made that survey? Claire looked uncomfortable. I did. Denzel stared. You? 18 months ago. For who? Daly Land Management. Thomas stood. Claire continued before he could speak. I certified a boundary adjustment based on documents Grant's office supplied. Were they false? I don't know. What changed your mind? One deed. She pulled out a copy. It says it was executed in 1976. Helen nodded. And? The legal description references the county grid coordinate system. Denzel waited. Claire looked at him. That grid wasn't adopted here until 1988. The room went silent. Thomas whispered, forged. Claire held up a hand. Suspicious. Who benefits? Denzel asked. Daily land management. Denzel sat back. Of course. Claire looked at him. I signed the survey. You didn't make the document. I should have questioned it. Denzel saw the shame. Fresh, unlike Thomas's 40-year shame. What are you doing now? Correcting it. Will Grant sue you? Probably. You okay with that? Claire looked him in the eye. No. Then she rolled up her sleeves. But I'm doing it anyway. For the first time since the storm, Denzel felt like he had an ally who wasn't connected to the original betrayal. 3 days later, Grant called. Come back to the ranch. No. I'm offering your job back. Denzel almost laughed. Same job? Assistant foreman, 15% raise. What changed? I overreacted. No. Denzel, you knew Samuel. I knew of him. You knew your father represented him. Silence. Where did you hear that? Denzel smiled. There it is. Thomas is filling your head with old stories. Samuel wrote them down. Grant said nothing. And recorded them. Longer silence. Grant's voice softened. Come talk? No? You need a job. Denzel looked at the Brooks land envelope. Grant was right. That made the offer more insulting. I'd rather shovel manure for cash. You've done that before. So have you. Grant sighed. You're making this personal. My grandfather is buried in this. Samuel isn't buried there. You know what I mean. Grant paused. Callahan doesn't care about you. I don't need him to. Evelyn will protect the ranch. Maybe. And Thomas will protect Evelyn. Maybe. You'll end up with lawyer bills and nothing else. Denzel stared out the window. What are you afraid I'll find, Grant? I'm not afraid. You keep calling. Grant hung up. An hour later, he appeared in Denzel's driveway. No hat. Grant without a hat always looked less certain. Denzel stayed on the porch. You shouldn't have come. 5 minutes. You have 2. Grant stopped at the steps. You want money. Denzel stared. Because if this is really about what Samuel was owed, there are ways to settle. How much? Grant seemed surprised, he asked. 500,000. Denzel let the numbers sit. More money than he had ever seen. Enough for a ranch. Enough to never worry about rent. Enough to buy new trucks, cattle, horses. Enough to change his life. Grant saw his silence. Cash settlement. You relinquish any claim. The cemetery gets a memorial site. Denzel looked at him. Gets moved. Respectfully. Where? Another part of the property. Who chooses? Professionals. Denzel nodded slowly. You're offering me $500,000 so dead people don't inconvenience your road? That's not fair. Stop using that word. Grant's jaw tightened. You think Samuel would want you broke over this? I think Samuel wanted the land. He's dead. Grant regretted the words instantly. Denzel stepped down from the porch. Grant backed half a step without realizing. That's the second time you've tried to make dead people smaller because they can't argue with you. I didn't mean... Yes, you did. Denzel pointed toward the driveway. Leave. 750. Denzel stared. Grant swallowed. 1 million. Denzel almost smiled. You doubled your offer in 30 seconds. You want the money or don't you? No. Grant genuinely looked confused. Why? Denzel realized then that Grant believed every man had a number. Every promise. Every grave. Every memory. There was always a number. That was why Denzel unsettled him. Grant couldn't calculate him. You know what your problem is? Denzel asked. Grant stared. You think because money matters, it's the only thing that matters. Money keeps ranches alive. So does trust. Trust doesn't pay feed bills? No. Denzel nodded. But once nobody trusts you, you start paying a lot more for everything. Grant left angry. That night, someone broke into Denzel's house. The television remained. Laptop remained. Cash remained. Samuel's notebook disappeared. Only one. The notebook containing the detailed Callahan promises. Denzel stood in the kitchen staring at the open metal box. His heart pounded harder than it had during the storm. They knew exactly what they wanted. He called the sheriff. Deputy Mark Hensley arrived 40 minutes later. Hensley had known Denzel since high school. Not friends, not enemies. Small town, familiar. He photographed the broken window. Anything else gone? No. Cash? No. Electronics? No. Then somebody wanted paper? Yes. Who knew you had it? Denzel listed names. Thomas, Lillian, Helen, Claire, Evelyn, Grant. Hensley paused. Grant Daly? Yes. Your former boss? Yes. You accusing him? I'm giving you a name. Grant's lived here his whole life. Denzel looked at him. So have I. Hensley shifted. You know what I mean. I do. That made Hensley uncomfortable. Good. Thomas arrived before the deputy finished. When he saw the broken window, his face went pale. What's missing? One notebook. Which? Denzel told him. Thomas sat. They knew. Hensley looked at him. You saying they? Whoever. After the deputy left, Thomas said, Stay somewhere else tonight. No. Denzel. This is my house. They may come back. Then they'll find me. That sounds like Sam. Denzel started sweeping glass. Everybody keeps saying that. Thomas watched him. Sam duplicated important cattle records. Denzel stopped. What? He never trusted one copy. Denzel looked toward the metal box. Aunt Lillian. The next morning, Lillian smiled when he told her. You think Sam trusted one box? She pointed to a red Bible. Inside was an envelope, photocopies. Not everything, but enough. Denzel laughed. Lillian tapped the Bible. Your granddaddy trusted God. She smiled, just didn't trust Callahan's. 2 days later, Claire called. We need to survey the cemetery. How? Ground-penetrating radar. Can you do it? I can coordinate it. Cost? She told him. Denzel closed his eyes. Another chunk of his savings. Thomas offered again. Denzel refused again. Claire said, There may be a preservation group willing to help. Ask. She did. Descendants began appearing once word spread. The first was a woman named Teresa Reed from Helena. Her grandmother had told her stories about New Hope. Then Marcus Talley from Idaho. Then a Jenkins family from Billings. People sent photographs, funeral cards, Bible pages, a handwritten burial list found in an attic. Suddenly the Fieldstones became people. Annie Reed, born 1871, cooked at 3 ranches, raised 6 children. Elias Brooks, horsebreaker, Spanish-American War veteran according to family memory, though records still needed confirmation. Lucy Jenkins, midwife, delivered children across the valley for decades. Henry Talley, blacksmith. The cemetery wasn't a workers' cemetery anymore. It was a community. Ground-penetrating radar found 63 probable graves. 21 lay outside the cemetery boundary shown on Mountain West's development plan. 11 sat directly beneath the proposed road. Helen filed for emergency relief. The courtroom was too small for everyone who showed up. Reporters stood along the back wall. Grant sat with two attorneys. Evelyn sat behind him. Denzel noticed she looked exhausted. Thomas sat beside Denzel. His hands shook slightly. Treatment. The judge listened to Helen explain the burial findings. Mountain West's attorneys argued construction had not begun, and all remains would be handled according to law. Grant's attorney argued Denzel had no established ownership interest. Then Thomas stood. Helen whispered, "Sit down." Thomas shook his head. He asked the judge for permission to speak. The judge allowed it. Thomas faced the room. "My name is Thomas Callahan." Everyone knew. "My family has owned ranch land in this county for more than a century." He paused. "And some of what we called ownership survived because other families did not receive what they were promised." The room went quiet. Evelyn closed her eyes. "In 1984, Samuel Brooks gave my family money and cattle that prevented Callahan Ranch from failing." Grant whispered to his lawyer. "My father promised Samuel approximately 200 acres in return." Thomas looked toward Denzel. "The land was never transferred." Then back to the judge. "I knew about that agreement. Later, I had authority to honor it." His voice cracked. "I chose not to." Murmurs spread. Denzel watched Evelyn. A tear moved down her cheek. Thomas continued, "I cannot tell this court what legal rights Mr. Brooks' grandson has, but I can tell you the underlying claim is true." Grant's lawyer stood. "Your Honor." The judge raised a hand. Thomas finished. "And whatever this court ultimately decides about title, I ask that nobody disturb that cemetery until the families buried there have been identified and their descendants heard." The judge granted 14 days. Outside, reporters surrounded Thomas. Denzel moved away from the cameras. Claire approached. "You okay?" "No." "Good." Denzel looked at her. "Good. Means you understand 14 days isn't a win." He smiled faintly. "You're cheerful. I work with boundary disputes. Optimism gets expensive." Grant approached from across the parking lot. "You happy?" Denzel looked at him. "No." "You're destroying a ranch. You're trying to sell one. I'm trying to create something. For you. For this county." Denzel stepped closer. "You know what that deed says?" Grant's face shifted. Tiny. Claire noticed too. "What deed?" Grant asked. Claire folded her arms. "The 1976 deed your survey depended on." Grant looked at her. "You certified it?" "Yes." "You made a mistake. That's your problem." Claire stared. "I don't think the mistake started with me." Grant's jaw tightened. Denzel watched him leave. Claire whispered, "He knows." Yes, the first false sense of safety came 3 days later. Mountain West voluntarily suspended activity. The radar results were receiving press. Helen believed the cemetery could be protected. Thomas's affidavit strengthened Denzel's claim. For the first time in weeks, Denzel slept through the night. The next morning, Evelyn called. "I need to see you." They met at a diner. She held her coffee with both hands. "I was wrong." Denzel waited. "About the cemetery. That's specific. I thought there were maybe 6 graves. There are 63. I know. Maybe more." She nodded. Denzel studied her. "You knew Samuel." Evelyn looked up. "Who told you?" "Nobody. I saw your face on West Meadow." She looked out the window. "He taught me to ride." Denzel stared. "When?" "I was 10. Grandpa taught you?" "I was terrified of horses." "Then he probably made fun of you." He told me the horse was more afraid of my hands than I was of the horse. Denzel smiled before he could stop himself. That sounded like Samuel. Evelyn's eyes filled. He was kind to me. And your family cheated him. Yes. You knew a version. Yes. What version? That Granddad had promised land, but that Samuel had been repaid through wages and bonuses. Denzel laughed bitterly. Wages? I know. No, you know now. She accepted it, then slid a folder across the table. The Mountain West Agreement. Why give me this? There's a clause you should know about. She pointed. If closing failed because of title defects, Daily Land Management could seek partition. Denzel read it twice. So, Grant wins either way. Not necessarily. But if Mountain West walks, he can force court proceedings, and the property could be auctioned. Yes. Why did Thomas hide this? Evelyn looked at him. He thought you might walk away. Denzel's anger rose. He's still deciding which truth I can handle. I told him not to. Denzel closed the folder. Anything else? Evelyn hesitated. There was. He could see it. Say it. Dad signed a letter of intent with Grant 6 months ago. Denzel stared. For West Meadow? Yes. He agreed to sell? Initially. Before the cemetery? Before we understood where the graves extended. Denzel leaned back. So Thomas was willing to sell until the deal became ugly enough to wake his conscience. Evelyn looked down. He backed out? When? 3 months ago. And that's why Grant is pushing. Yes, Denzel stood. Thank you. Where are you going? To ask your father how many confessions he needs before one includes everything. Thomas was at home, exhausted from treatment. Denzel put the agreement on his desk. You knew? Thomas closed his eyes. Yes. You agreed to sell? Temporarily. Stop. Thomas went silent. Grandpa waited 13 years because every Callahan explanation came with one more word attached. Denzel leaned over the desk. Temporarily. Eventually. Complicated. Later? Thomas looked ashamed. Tell me everything now. Thomas hesitated. Denzel saw it. There's still more. Yes. Denzel laughed in disbelief. What? Grant knew about Samuel before he hired you. Denzel went still. How? Philip kept files. Grant's father. Yes. Grant saw them? I believe so. Believe? Grant asked me about the Brooks family 8 years ago. Denzel stared. What did he ask? Whether Sam had children? Denzel felt cold. What did you tell him? That Sam's son had died, but there was a grandson. Me? Yes. And a year later, Grant hired me. Thomas nodded slowly. Denzel stepped back. 7 years. Every conversation with Grant changed shape. Every time Grant asked about Samuel's old house, every time he casually asked whether Lillian kept family papers, every time he wanted to know why Denzel cared about buying those 12 acres. You let me work for him 7 years knowing this? I didn't know why he hired you. You? Suspected? Yes. Denzel's voice went quiet. That might be worse. He left before Thomas could answer. The next morning, Denzel drove to Daly Ranch. Grant was beside the machine shed repairing a hydraulic line. He stood when Denzel approached. You shouldn't be here. Why'd you hire me? Grant wiped his hands. What? 7 years ago. You needed work. Try again. Grant looked toward the house. Denzel stepped closer. Did Philip tell you about Samuel's records? My father died years before I hired you. That wasn't my question. Grant's face hardened. You were a good hand. And convenient. I don't know what you mean. You wanted to know what my family still had. Grant laughed. This is paranoia. Did you ask Thomas about Samuel's heirs? Silence. Denzel nodded. There it is. Grant threw the rag down. You want truth? Yes. My father worried Samuel might sue. He was dead. You weren't. So you kept me close. I hired you because you could work. Both can be true. Grant stared. Denzel continued. You asked about Aunt Lillian. Conversation. You asked whether Samuel kept journals? I don't remember. You remember. Grant stepped closer. I gave you work when nobody else would. There it was again. Denzel shook his head. No. You hired a man who made your ranch money. You think that erases what I did for you? You paid me. I worked. Grant's face reddened. You're ungrateful. Denzel almost smiled. That word only works when the other person agrees they were charity. Grant said nothing. Did you break into my house? No. Did you take the notebook? No. Did you forge the deed? Grant's eyes flicked away. Denzel saw it. Grant pointed toward the road. Get off my property. Gladly. As Denzel turned, Grant spoke. You keep pushing this, and people are going to lose their livelihoods. Denzel looked back. Whose? My employees. The people you'll lay off because you didn't get your millions? You think this is funny? No. Callahan Ranch may fail too. Then maybe powerful families should stop treating desperate workers like collateral damage. Grant stared. You think you're different because you're doing this for graves? Denzel's voice stayed calm. I think I'm different because when somebody was in a ditch, I stopped. Grant's face went pale with anger. Denzel drove away. 2 days later, the sheriff called. They had found Samuel's missing notebook. Denzel sat down. Where? Daily Land Management Office. Silence. Hensley continued. We executed a search warrant related to the deed investigation. What else? Can't discuss everything. But Grant had my notebook. Yes. Still think him living here his whole life matters? Hensley was silent. Then he said, quietly, no. The forged deed collapsed quickly after that. The notary seal belonged to someone not commissioned until 1991. Digital records connected the scan to a daily land management computer. Grant denied personally creating it. His office manager blamed a former employee. Nobody believed the story. He was charged with burglary and evidence tampering. After investigators found security camera footage of his truck near Denzel's house the night of the break-in, the deed investigation continued. Mountain West announced it was reconsidering the entire route. People celebrated. Denzel didn't. He had learned too much to celebrate before paper was signed. Then Claire called at 3:12 in the morning. Get to West Meadow. He sat up. What happened? Equipment. What equipment? Excavators. Denzel was dressed in 3 minutes. When he reached the county road, floodlights glowed beyond the gate. 2 excavators, a bulldozer, 3 trucks. Grant stood near them. So did a Mountain West site supervisor. Denzel jumped from his truck. What the hell is this? Grant walked toward him. Emergency stabilization. Of what? Storm damage. Claire arrived behind Denzel. She took the permit from a worker. This was filed yesterday. Grant nodded. You're moving the fence. Repairing. Into disputed ground. According to recorded boundary. You know that, boundary is being corrected. Correction isn't recorded yet. An excavator started. Denzel stepped in front. The operator stopped. Grant shouted, "Move!" "No. You're trespassing." Denzel laughed. "On land you offered me $1 million to stop claiming?" Grant looked toward the workers. "Get him out of the way." Nobody moved. Claire stood beside Denzel. "What exactly are you trying to stabilize at 3 in the morning?" Grant's jaw tightened. "You don't understand ranch operations." "I understand surveying." Headlights appeared on the road. Then more. Helen had started calling descendants. Someone posted online. Within 30 minutes, cars lined the shoulder. Teresa Reed arrived. Marcus Talley, Jenkins descendants, local ranchers, people who had never met Denzel but had seen the cemetery story. Sheriff's vehicles arrived. Grant argued with deputies. Claire showed conflicting maps. Helen carried the court order. Then Thomas's truck pulled in. Evelyn drove. She helped her. Father out. Thomas looked terrible, pale, thin, cane in one hand. Denzel walked toward him. "You shouldn't be here." Thomas smiled weakly. "Neither should bulldozers." Evelyn looked at Grant. "What are you doing?" "Protecting assets." "Whose?" Grant stared. "You signed the development agreement." "I didn't sign this." A black SUV arrived. Mountain West's regional director stepped out. She walked straight toward Grant. "What is going on?" "Authorized site preservation." "Not by us." Grant froze. "You approved emergency access." "I approved inspection of storm runoff." She looked at the excavators. "This isn't inspection." Grant lowered his voice. "We have deadlines. We have 63 probable graves. Cameras were filming now." The director looked around. "I am not putting my company on television at sunrise with a bulldozer pointed at a cemetery." Grant's face collapsed. "No equipment moves?" She walked away. Grant stood alone in the road. For once, there was nobody left to order. Thomas suddenly swayed. Evelyn caught him. "Dad!" Denzel ran. Thomas collapsed. They called an ambulance. At the hospital, Denzel sat beside Evelyn while doctors treated dehydration and complications from chemotherapy. Evelyn stared at the floor. "He shouldn't have come." "No." "You told him not to?" "Yes." "He never listens." Denzel almost smiled. "Runs in the family?" Evelyn looked at him, then laughed once. It turned into tears. Denzel sat quietly. After a while, she said, "I hated you at first. I noticed. I thought Dad saw you as a way to die feeling like a good man." "Partly true." She nodded. "And I thought you would take advantage." "Also understandable." "No." Evelyn wiped her eyes. "It wasn't." Denzel waited. "I saw you as poor before I saw you as anything else." The admission hung between them. Denzel did not rush to make her feel better. She continued. "When Dad said Samuel's grandson was a ranch hand, I assumed money would solve it. Grant assumed the same. I know. You still think money doesn't matter?" "It matters." Denzel looked through the hospital window. Money mattered to Samuel. That's why losing the land hurt. Evelyn nodded. "He wasn't asking to be given something for free?" "No." "He'd already paid?" "Yes." She looked at him. "I'm sorry." Denzel nodded. "Thank you." Not forgiveness. Not yet. But acknowledgement. The next morning, Thomas woke. Denzel stood beside the Vaquior bed. Thomas smiled faintly. "Did we stop the equipment?" "Yes." "Good. You nearly died. Temporary inconvenience. Your daughter is going to kill you. Less temporary." Denzel sat. Thomas became serious. I signed something yesterday. What? My remaining Callahan interest in West Meadow. Denzel frowned. To who? You. Denzel stared. No. Thomas blinked. That isn't the response, Helen predicted. I'm not taking charity. It isn't charity. Then what? Restitution. Denzel stood. You don't even know if the court will recognize Samuel's claim. I recognize it. That's not enough. It is for my interest. How many acres? After disputed shares, approximately 123. No. Thomas looked irritated. You are a difficult man to apologize to. This is not an apology. No. Thomas's voice strengthened. It is land Samuel already paid for. Denzel went silent. Thomas continued. I cannot transfer what Grant legally owns. I cannot return 40 years. I cannot restore Sam's cattle. I cannot give him the years he waited. Thomas looked toward the window. But I can stop pretending the ground is mine. Denzel sat again. And Evelyn? She agreed. Why? Thomas smiled. Ask her. 3 weeks later, Mountain West withdrew from the project. Publicly, they cited route uncertainty, legal disputes, and preservation concerns. Grant's leverage collapsed. Without the development premium, the disputed land value dropped sharply. The irony wasn't lost on Denzel. Protecting West Meadow made it worth less money. For the first time, that felt like good news. Claire completed the corrected survey. Helen negotiated with Evelyn. Grant's legitimate ownership interests remained complicated, but his criminal charges weakened his position. A conservation group offered to purchase a preservation easement over the cemetery. The money could help settle some disputed shares without removing the land from Denzel's control. Slowly, piece by piece, a solution formed. Not a miracle. Paperwork, compromise, people choosing differently than the generation before them. Denzel accepted the transfer, not because Thomas was dying, not because he had saved Thomas in a storm, because Samuel Brooks had already paid. That distinction mattered. 3 months later, Thomas asked Denzel to meet him at West Meadow. Autumn had painted the cottonwoods yellow. Thomas moved slowly with a cane. They stopped near the cemetery. Temporary markers now showed names. Some confirmed, some probable. Thomas touched one. Your grandfather would hate these plastic markers. He'd complain about the price. Thomas laughed, then coughed. Denzel watched him. You look terrible. Thank you. I mean it. So do I. They stood in silence. Thomas handed him a folder. What now? Conservation easement. Denzel read. Permanent protection for the cemetery. No road, no excavation except approved archaeological or family work. Ranching permitted on the remaining property. Public access for descendants on designated days. Denzel looked up. You helped write this? Helen did. You planned everything. I planned an option. Denzel nodded. Thomas looked toward the ridge. I used to think land was proof that a family had succeeded. And now, I think sometimes land is proof of what a family refused to admit. Denzel studied him. You afraid to die? Thomas smiled. Yes. Denzel hadn't expected the answer. Thomas continued. I'm not afraid of being dead. What then? Running out of time while things are unfinished? Denzel looked toward the graves. Everything stays unfinished for somebody. Thomas nodded. That sounds like Sam. Stop saying that. I can't. Denzel smiled. Thomas became serious. You know, The day you stopped for me. I almost told you to leave. You did tell me. I mean, after the mare was out. Why? Because I saw your cattle. So, I knew you were sacrificing something. Denzel shrugged. Didn't know it was my job. Thomas laughed. I spent my whole life protecting my own interests, and you had almost nothing. Yet you risked what you had for someone you didn't know. Denzel looked at him. You're making the rescue too important. Maybe. I didn't save you because I'm better than you. I know. I stopped because leaving would have bothered me. Thomas smiled. That is exactly the difference. What? You cared what kind of man you would be after you drove away. Denzel thought about it. Thomas looked across West Meadow. I wish I had asked myself that in 1997. They stood together until the wind grew cold. Thomas Callahan died 11 weeks later. The funeral filled a church in Bozeman. Ranchers came from across Montana. Business owners, former employees, people who knew Thomas as generous, people who knew him as stubborn, people who knew nothing about Samuel Brooks. Denzel sat near the back. He wasn't sure where he belonged. Evelyn found him after the service. My father left this for you. She handed him a small wooden box. Inside was an old pocket knife. Denzel recognized the initials immediately. S.B. His fingers stopped. Samuel's. Yes. How did Thomas get it? Your grandfather gave it to Dad when Dad was 18. Denzel opened the blade. Still sharp. There's a note. He unfolded the paper. Sam gave me this knife after I cut my hand repairing fence wire with the wrong tool. He told me a man who refuses to use the right tool usually damages more than the fence. I spent too much of my life using money where honesty was required, silence where courage was required, and delay where action was required. You stopped for me when stopping cost you something. I hope, before the end, I learned to do the same. Denzel folded the note. Evelyn looked toward the parking lot. He talked about that storm constantly. He nearly killed 2 horses because he didn't check the forecast. She laughed through tears. That sounds like him. They walked outside. Denzel said, You keeping the ranch? I'm trying. Debt? Still there. Employees? Still there. You need help? Evelyn looked at him. With what? Cattle. Are you looking for a job? Denzel shook his head. No. He looked toward the mountains. I'm looking for neighbors. By spring, West Meadow had a new fence. Denzel built much of it himself. Claire helped mark the boundaries. Descendants volunteered to clean the cemetery. A historical group documented graves. Students from Montana State came to help map names. A stone marker was installed near the entrance. New Hope Burial Ground, resting place of ranch workers, homesteaders, mothers, fathers, children, veterans, horsemen, cooks, builders, and families who helped shape this valley. Denzel insisted on one thing. The word workers would never stand alone. People were more than their labor. He built a modest barn on the north side of the property, then a small 2-bedroom house, nothing fancy, a porch facing west. Duke moved there first. The old gelding stood in the pasture on opening night as if he had always owned the place. Denzel carried Samuel's photograph onto the porch. The sunset turned the mountains orange. For years, Denzel had dreamed of owning 12 acres. Now he stood on land Samuel had fought for before Denzel was born. It did not feel like being rich. It felt like being responsible. A truck came up the driveway. Claire. She stepped out holding 2 coffees. You know fences are supposed to be straight. Denzel looked toward his new fence. It's straight. It has opinions. So do you. Claire handed him coffee. Over the months, she had become more than the surveyor who corrected a mistake. They had spent hours driving boundary lines, arguing over maps, eating bad diner pie, searching county archives, calling descendants. Neither had named what was growing between them. Denzel was fine with that. Some things improved when nobody rushed them. Claire sat. You hear about Grant? Sentencing next month. Daly Ranch is selling part of the operation. Denzel looked at her. How much? Most of the cattle. He felt something unexpected. Sadness. Grant had wronged him, used him, intimidated him, taken Samuel's notebook. Still, Daly Ranch held 7 years of Denzel's life. Not every memory was bad. There were calves he had saved, foals he had watched stand for the first time, sunrises over frozen pasture, good employees who had nothing to do with Grant's decisions. Consequences rarely landed only on the person who caused them. What about the workers? Evelyn offered some positions. Denzel nodded. Good. Claire looked at Samuel's photograph. That your grandfather? Yes. You look like him. Denzel looked down at the pale birthmark. So everybody keeps telling me. She sipped coffee. You ever think about selling? Denzel looked at her. This? Yes. No. Not even if somebody offered millions. Denzel looked toward New Hope Cemetery, then the barn, then the mountains. No. Claire smiled. Good. Years passed. Not many. Enough. Denzel built a small quarter horse operation on West Meadow. He never became one of Montana's largest ranchers. He didn't want to. He raised good horses, leased pasture to younger ranchers who needed a start, gave teenagers weekend work. Every agreement was written. Every handshake came with paper behind it. That became a joke in the valley. Denzel trusts everybody, people said. He just trusts them better after signatures. He never argued. One summer afternoon, a young man arrived asking for work. 22, thin, nervous, clean boots trying too hard to look worn. Denzel read the application. Marcus Reed. Yes, sir. Family from Livingston? My grandmother. What was her name? Janice Reed. Denzel looked toward the cemetery. Come with me. Marcus followed. They walked up the hill. Denzel stopped beside the Reed family markers. Marcus stared. My grandma used to say some of our people were buried out here. She was right. Marcus crouched. For several minutes, he said nothing. Then he looked around. You own this? Denzel shook his head. I take care of it. Same thing. No. Denzel looked across the graves. Not the same thing. They returned toward the barn. Marcus asked, Do I have the job? You know how to saddle? Yes. Good saddle or social media saddle? Marcus laughed. Good saddle. We'll see. At the barn, Denzel handed him a broom. Marcus looked disappointed. Cleaning? Barn needs cleaning. I thought I'd be working horses. You will. When? When I know you can take care of where they sleep. Marcus picked up the broom. Denzel walked away smiling. Later that afternoon, thunder appeared over the mountains. Not a dangerous storm, just Montana summer weather. Denzel stood on his porch watching rain move across West Meadow. The horses lifted their heads. Duke was gone now, buried beneath a cottonwood near the barn. Denzel missed him. Claire had eventually stopped bringing 2 coffees and started making them in the kitchen. Her boots now sat beside Denzel's at the door. Life had moved. slowly, naturally. Denzel watched lightning flash over the distant ridge. For a moment, he was back on County Road 16. Thomas in the ditch. 2 frightened horses. An auction clock running out. Grant's voice on the phone. A decision that had taken less than 5 seconds. Stop or keep driving. At the time, Denzel believed he had sacrificed something. Money, a job, security. He had no idea that the old man in the flood carried a 40-year-old promise with him. But Denzel had learned not to turn that into a fairy tale. Kindness did not always bring rewards. Samuel had been generous and still died without receiving what he was owed. Doing right did not protect people from loss. Thomas chose courage late and died knowing he could never return all the years he had wasted. Justice did not erase consequences. Grant's employees still lost jobs. Evelyn inherited debt. Families still had to confront a history they wished were different. And Denzel's land had not arrived because $80, a flooded trailer, and 2 horses somehow earned him 200 acres. That would have made the story easier. It would also have made it false. Thomas did not give Denzel West Meadow because Denzel saved him. He returned it because Samuel Brooks had already paid for it. The storm merely brought 2 unfinished stories onto the same road. That difference mattered. Denzel walked from the porch toward New Hope Cemetery. The rain had not reached the valley yet. Grass moved around the stones. Names that had almost disappeared were visible again. Brooks, Reed, Jenkins, Talley, Morris. There were more names now. Some found in church records, some in family Bibles, some still listed only as unknown. Denzel stopped beside Elias Brooks' marker. A small American flag had been placed there after researchers confirmed his military service. For decades, the man had rested beneath a fieldstone with almost no one knowing his name. Now children came on preservation days and asked who he was. That mattered more to Denzel than any appraisal. Footsteps came behind him. Claire. Rain's coming. I know. You planning to stand out here and prove you're tougher than weather? No. Good. Because dinner's ready. Denzel looked toward the house. Lights glowed through the windows. He thought of Samuel, then Thomas, then Grant. 3 men from different generations who had all believed, at some point, that land meant power. Denzel had learned something else. Land was memory, responsibility, a place where decisions remained long after the people who made them were gone. He touched the old pocket knife in his jeans. Samuel's knife. Thomas's apology. Now Denzel's responsibility. He turned toward home. Before reaching the gate, headlights appeared on the county road. An old pickup slowed, pulled over. Hazard lights began flashing. Claire looked at Denzel. You see that? Yeah. The driver stepped out. Young woman. Flat tire, 2 children in the cab. Rain started. Claire smiled. You're going, aren't you? Denzel looked toward the truck, then at the storm, then at Claire. Would bother me if I didn't. She shook her head. I'll get your jacket. Denzel walked toward the road. The rain fell harder. The young woman looked relieved when she saw him. Sir, I'm sorry. I don't have a jack strong enough for this truck. That's all right. I called roadside assistance, but they said an hour. Denzel looked at the dark clouds. We won't need an hour. You don't even know me. Denzel opened the toolbox. No. He glanced once toward West Meadow behind him, toward the house, toward New Hope Cemetery, toward the ground Samuel Brooks had spent half a lifetime waiting for someone else to return. Then Denzel smiled. I don't need to. Because his grandfather had spent decades waiting for other men to keep their promises. Denzel had decided long ago that whenever his own moment came, he would simply keep his.